Blairsville area until I found out that it was $1,000,001 to purchase the house. Of course, it did have a four-car garage. That was a good selling point. Um, but unlike the rest of you, I don't have pockets that deep, so I had to walk away from that. But I did get some really good photos, and God's goodness has been exemplified for us and spoken about. Thank you very much in the comments that were made about the Lord's Supper. That is His ultimate goodness, is that He sent His Son to die on our behalf, and that Jesus went through with that plan. He said, Father, if you can find another way, if there's a plan B, I'm paraphrasing, if there's a plan B, let's do that, but if not, your will be done. And He wound up going to the cross on our behalf and showed love. There's a story I came across years ago, and it stuck with me. This woman was walking down the sidewalk and passed some stores, and she passed a shoe store, and there was a young boy there, and he had his face up against the glass, and he was looking through the window. And then she noticed him more particularly, he wasn't wearing any shoes. So she grabbed him by the hand and said, come with me, and they went in the store, and she asked the proprietor for a basin of water and a towel and washed his filthy little feet, bought him a half dozen pair of socks and put a pair on him, got the attendant to find him some shoes that would fit his feet, put those on him, and paid for everything, and was walking out towards the door with him, and he stopped her and said, excuse me, but are you God's wife? That's sweet, isn't it? And, hopefully that's what we're like as Christians. We see a need and we act on it, and that's what I'd like to talk to you about for the next few minutes, is reflecting Jesus. When we're baptized or immersed in Him, our life is supposed to reflect His so much that people can't help but see God through how we act and the words that we say. In my place of work, I was passing by someone that didn't know I could hear them, and they were comparing me to the last guy that had been there, and they were saying, Jim's like a breath of fresh air. I approach my work with diligence and with joy, and I enjoy what I do, and enjoy doing it to make others happy. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's good to hear. It helps me to know that I'm fulfilling my purpose in reflecting and mirroring Christ. You might say, well, I don't really know how to do that. Well, that's something we'll discuss here for a few moments. When I was a young boy, I was painfully shy. Now, you probably would be startled to hear that, might not guess it by seeing where I am right now at least. I wouldn't look anybody in the eye, and I wouldn't speak out, and that caused me a lot of problems. When I was in grade school and early years of high school, I found out after the fact that people in my classes, my classmates, thought that because I wouldn't speak to them, that I was stuck up, I was proud, and that I was too far above them to even speak to them. That was not the case at all. I was so painfully shy, I was afraid that if I said something, it would come out wrong and I'd be humiliated. So I just didn't say anything much. And I got bullied is the proper word for it throughout my high school years and middle school years. I got off to college and went to Lubbock Christian College, and I was walking across the campus one day, and I saw this group of people. There's about 15 of them, and there's one guy standing in the center, and he was telling some story, and everybody was just hanging on his every word, listening to what he had to say, and they're all smiling. And when he finished the story, it must have had a punchline because they all laughed, having a good time, and just standing around waiting to hear what words might come out of his mouth next. And I looked at this guy that I found out was Lawrence, because I asked, I want to be like Lawrence. So I started hanging around him and made him my best friend. We eventually wound up sharing an apartment together. Come back to him later. But he was a really positive influence on my life because I wanted to be like he was. I wanted to be helping people to smile and laugh and enjoy their lives. And I think to a great degree that he was a turning point in my life, helping me to do that very kind of thing. I enjoy telling stories and jokes. I enjoy speaking in public. The census was taken a few years back. The thing that most people gives them grief or heartaches is to be asked to be called on to speak in public after some fashion. Number one fear in America is being called on to speak in public. I've gotten past that part. I don't mind doing it. I'm comfortable now with that. And it's because I learned to imitate Lawrence, and Lawrence was imitating Christ. My life got better from that moment forward. One day, coming back to him just for a brief moment, I was riding with him in his little Buick, and we were coming back from class together and going to the apartment. We came into the parking lot fairly fast, I thought. What's he trying to do here? And the sidewalk in front of our door is only like 2 inches higher than the parking lot. And he turns the wheel to come up the door, and I thought, man, I could hear the tires kind of squalling and protesting a little bit. We didn't slow down at all. We plowed right through the front door of our apartment. And bricks were falling on the hood of the car, and dust was flying everywhere. And I just sat there, my hands on the dash, and I'm just kind of shaking a little bit from the impact. And when I could kind of get my physical breath and emotions back, I looked over at Lawrence and said, "What was that all about?" And he started laughing. And I started laughing. He had that effect on me. He was laughing in the middle of a difficult circumstance. And when I asked him what was that all about, he held up his foot and said, "I'm wearing boots today, and my boot got caught behind the brake pedal and on top of the gas pedal, and the more I tried to get it loose, the faster we were going." Oh, well, that explains it very well. Thank you very much. Our landlord came by and expressed disgust and got his insurance information and put up a big plastic sheet across the door, what used to be the door, the opening for the door. And 3 days later, we got the worst dust storm in Texas history. You could hear kids from New Mexico screaming as they blew overhead. And that dust went right through that plastic sheet like it wasn't even there. It went up in the attic, and it came down and settled on top of everything, including all the clothes in the closets and the floors. And we spent a couple of weeks cleaning and getting things washed and dry cleaned to recover from that. But you know what? He laughed through it all. And I laughed through it and had a good attitude about it. You don't see me crying up here telling that story. He just made it funny. It's just, things happen, right? Things happen to all of us. One of the ladies here this morning showed me a photograph of a crow that used to show up in her yard every day. Crow's only got one leg. I don't know if a hawk got it, snake got it, or it's born without a foot. But it manages to stand on that one foot and eat the breadcrumbs she threw out to it. And she painted the likeness of that bird on a canvas. I think that's pretty great, that bird has learned to deal with its difficulty. And we may or may not have difficulties of our own, but I bet you anything that you know people who are going through a tough time. And maybe you can just help them get through that tough time. There was an analyst once who took down the names of 200 children, and then he watched them grow up. And as they reached young adulthood or beyond, he began reaching out to them and asking about their life stories and checking up on their history. He found out that of this 200 children, 196 of them had never been arrested, been jailed, or sent to prison for any kind of misdemeanor or crime whatsoever. And he got to thinking about it. Well, what in the world? There's got to be some common thread here. So he started searching for that, and he narrowed it down to a single teacher. They'd all had one particular teacher. And so he found that teacher, and he went to her home and interviewed her. And he said, "I found this out about these 200 students that passed through your class." And he gave her the list of the names, and she looked at it. And he said, "What did you do that helped them to turn out so well? Almost every single one of them turned out really well, never got in trouble with the law at all." And she said, "I loved them." Man, isn't love powerful? Love can touch lives. Love can impact and change lives. John chapter 13 and verse 34. You probably thought I wasn't going to quote you any scripture this morning, but I can't quite do that. John 13:34. A new commandment I give to you, Jesus said, that you love one another. Y'all know that verse, I'm sure, by heart. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another. It seems simple, doesn't it? But how often do we fail to do that one simple thing? I have a niece, and she has 3 children. They are 13, 12, and 10. I've been in her home several times this past year, and it suddenly struck me after one visit, after having been there several times, this thing struck me. I never have once in all my visits to her home seen her reach out and hug her children. I have never heard her say once to any of her children, I love you, Landon. I love you, Emma. I love you, Gracie. And I find that strange and discomforting. And I hope I can talk to her about it someday. And maybe I'm judging where I shouldn't be. Maybe after I'm gone, she tells them that she loves them or she hugs them. She just doesn't want to do it in front of me. But, man, I'd prefer that she did. As I was growing up, I had a good childhood. I'm privileged in that way. I had good parents. They not only showed me love, but they demonstrated love. And not only that, it was daily and multiple times a day I was told, I love you. Thanks, Dad, I love you too. I love you. Thanks, Mom, I love you too. And I cherish those memories. My mother's still alive, and she tells me when I see her, or when she talks, or when on the phone, or when she writes, Jim, I love you. I still need to hear that. I'm not needy, dependent on that kind of thing for me to have a good life, but I want to hear it. I want to hear that I'm loved. I imagine all the rest of you do too. It's a common thing with us. God put it into our DNA. Jesus went on in John chapter 13 and verse 35. If you love each other, everyone will know that you are my disciples. That's pretty telling, isn't it? Some folks, like, I was in FFA when I was a kid. And you could tell who the kids were that were in FFA because they all had that same little blue corduroy jacket with the gold FFA stenciled into the breast pocket area. You could tell who the FFA people were. That blue jacket gave it away. But with Christians, it's something about us personally. People will know that we are disciples of Jesus if we will show love to our fellow human beings, our fellow man. Start at home, fellow Christians. Learn from there if you haven't already. Start with loving your Christian brothers and sisters, but then take it outside by all means and love other people. There's a verse in the Bible that I bet all of you know. It's from 1 John chapter 4 and verse 7. It says, love is from God. And then verse 8 says, God is love. We also know that God is eternal. He has no beginning and he has no end. If God is love, then love has always been around. And we need to tap into that. It's more than saying, I love you, because I've been told I love you by people that have treated me really badly. It's doing something. It's proving it in some way or another. It's doing things that help people, let people know you really care about them. In James chapter 2 and verses 15 and 16, he says, if you know someone who doesn't have any clothes or food, you shouldn't just say, I hope all goes well for you. I hope you will be warm and have plenty to eat. What good is it to say this unless you do something to help? In verse 17, faith that doesn't lead us to do good deeds is all alone and dead. That's kind of shocking, isn't it? Your faith is dead if you aren't helping someone else. Because folks, so we all have trials, right? It may not be this week, but it could have been last week. I've been through a few horrible things, and it was rough at the time, but then I contemplate, well, because of what I've been through, now I'm able to comfort or console or help someone who's going through that almost exact same thing right now, because I've been through it. I've walked in those shoes. I felt the nails come up through the thin soles, so to speak. I know the pain in their heart and in their minds, and I can say, hey, you know what, I've been through that. Let me talk with you. Let me help you. Let me offer you some words of wisdom or some guidance or something, or let me do something for you. What do you need done? I'll tell you a poverty story. I walked into my apartment one day as a young man and opened up my cupboards. It's getting on time for supper. And I had a single can of Campbell's tomato soup in there. That's all that I had in my cupboard. And I felt like, the last meal thing, I'll eat this can of soup and then I'll die. I was being very pessimistic, wasn't I? But the phone rang while I was contemplating that. The phone rang. Weird timing because of what I'm about to tell you. It was one of the elders for the church that I was attending. And he said, hey, Jim, you got any plans for this evening? I said, no, sir, not really. Standing here in the kitchen, looking around. He said, well, the reason I'm calling is my wife has been cooking all day and she's got the equivalent of a 5-course meal fixed up, and we want to invite you to come over and eat with us. Well, glory be, hallelujah. What time do you want me there? How's 6 o'clock? I can be there at 6 o'clock. And I went over there and had the most fabulous meal. And the can of soup got saved for later. And I don't remember actually missing a meal since that time. Because he's good. Because he loves us. He's always looked out for me. And judging by the fact that you're here today, I'd say he's always looked out for you as well. We get through the hard times, don't we? But it goes a whole lot better if we show people that we love them. I was driving across Texas heading back to school. Late August, you can imagine how hot that would be. And I found this young man. He was walking down the side of the road, 103-degree temperatures, carrying a backpack. I did the Christian thing. I pulled over and asked him if he'd like a ride. He said, I sure would. And he put his backpack in the back seat, and he got in the car, and I took off driving, and he wound up being really easy to talk to. And we cruised on down the road, and he told me about his life, and I told him about my life. And before it was all over, he told me that he was selling books during the summertime for Southeastern book sales. I said, really? My roommate sells for Southeastern during the summers. He said, really? He said, what's his name? I said, Lawrence, the guy that I told you about before. Lawrence Crowder. Lawrence, he's like a god to us. He always outsells everybody every year. He's just tremendous at sales. I thought, well, reflecting on his personality, I could see why. He's easy to be around. And so that just lit a whole nother fire under the conversation. We just chatted along and had the best old time, and I got finally to an exit off the interstate that was close to his home, within easy walking distance, he said, and I let him off there. And I went on my way rejoicing that I had done something good for my fellow man. I'm not telling you this story to brag on me. I went a little further down the road, And my 1972 Camaro went, not quite that loud, sorry. But, and it started slowing down. Grabbed the wheel and I pulled over into the shoulder. Parked the car. What in the world just happened? And I looked at the gauges to see if I could get a clue. Gas gauges over here on the bottom, below the bottom. I had been running down to fumes. I'd had such a good time talking with that young man, I had completely forgotten to pay attention to the car. It's August. It's 103 degrees, approaching Lubbock, Texas. What are you going to do? I got out, locked the car, and started walking in the same direction I'd been driving, not knowing where that might lead me or how long it might take me to get to civilization, because when I looked around, all I could see was dust and dirt and occasional tree and a lot of sand dune kind of stuff, like desert area. Doesn't look good. I'd walked maybe 100 feet and I heard the sound of a motor and tires crunching on the sand that was blowing across the road. And I kind of stepped out of the way, and this guy was in a pickup truck. And he rolled his window down and he says, "Hey, did you run out of gas?" And he kind of smirked. I said, "Yeah, I sure did." He said, "Would you like a ride?" I said, "I sure would." So I got in the truck with him. 7 miles up the road was how far it took to get to the nearest anything of civilization. It was a gas station. And he dropped me off and he said, "Here you go." I said, "That's great, thanks." And he drove off. I went inside and I asked the young lady inside there if she had a gas can she could sell me, because I'd run out of gas. "No, we don't have any gas cans." And I thought, but didn't say, "You don't have any gas cans for sale at a gas station? That's odd." But then she perked up. She got a big smile across her face, and she said, "But I've got this gallon jar here. It's only got 2 more dill pickles left in it. I can transfer those to another jar. We can rinse it out, and you can put some gas in that." I said, "Great. Have you got a paper funnel?" "Yes, sir." So I bought a gallon of gas, paper funnel. I step out across all 4 lanes of traffic and start heading back 7 miles on the shoulder back to my car. I had gone 50 feet. And somebody else with a different pickup pulled up alongside me and said, "You must have run out of gas somewhere." I said, "Yes, sir, a few miles up the road." "Well, hop in, I'll take you to your car." That not only took me to my car, but waited while I put the gas in and waited till they made sure that it was starting and running and that I was going to be able to get where I was going. And that's the reason I tell you that story. They didn't know me from Adam or Eve. But they stopped and helped me and showed me some love at a time when I needed it. And that's a little bit of an extreme story, but that's the kind of thing that we can do for others as Christians. In John chapter 13 and verse 1, it says, Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave the world and to return to the Father. He had always loved his followers in this world, and he loved them to the very end and beyond, as we know. So during the meal, Jesus got up, removed his outer garment, and wrapped a towel around his waist, and he put some water into a large bowl and began washing his disciples' filthy feet and drying them with the towel he was wearing. After Jesus had washed his disciples' feet and put his outer garment back on, he sat down again, and then he said, "Do you understand what I have done?" Well, let me think. Jesus, you just washed my feet. You call me your teacher and Lord, and you should, because that is who I am. And if your Lord and teacher has washed your feet, you should do the same for each other. I have set the example, and this is a really key word here. Pay attention to it. I have set the example, and you should do for each other exactly what I have done for you. He had a servant heart, we would say, and he washed their feet. Why did he wash their feet? Because that's what they needed. They were all getting ready to sit down for a meal together, and the way they ate their meals was they kind of circled the wagons, as we would say, and their feet were next to somebody else's face. Well, you don't want somebody's dirty feet in your face, do you? You really don't want somebody's feet in your face, period, but certainly not dirty feet. So he had done for them what they needed, and he used the word example on purpose. I'm guessing that probably all of you took a shower or bath this morning, and I don't need to wash your feet, but if you come up to me this afternoon and take off your shoe and sock and show me your dirty feet and say, hey, I could use my feet washed, well, let's find some water and a towel, and I'll do that for you if that's what you need. Typically what people need are a variety of things. They may need help getting their car washed or their lawn mowed, or getting some groceries from the store if they're not feeling like getting out. They may need somebody to just come over and sit with them and talk with them and pray with them and help them kind of get back on their feet again mentally. I got phone calls on 5 different occasions one year from this young lady, and she would just call and she would just talk for a couple of hours, literally a couple of hours. And she called me a 6th time and said, I've heard you're going home and I probably will not see you. And I just want to call and thank you for the phone calls, the 5 phone calls. And I said, who is this? And she said, it's Mary Ellen. Maybe you'll remember me because I'm the one that called you and I stayed on the phone for a couple of hours each time. I said, oh yeah, I remember you. And she said, really, I'm just calling to thank you because you took time to talk with me and to listen to me, because each time I called you, I was getting ready to commit suicide. And because you would listen and give me some feedback, I didn't do it 5 times. You have literally saved my life 5 times. We don't know, do we? What little, that was little. That was inconsequential to me. I would have never thought of it again if she hadn't made that 6th phone call. I have this feeling that we're going to get to heaven and we're going to have people walking up to each one of us and saying, hey, let me thank you for what you did for me on April 3rd of 1997. Maybe you don't remember, but this is what you did, and it made such a difference to me, and it turned my life around. And I was able to go out and help others because of the influence that you had for good on me. Thank you. I anticipate heaven will be in part like that. In Luke chapter 5 and verse 17 beginning, some Pharisees and experts in the law of Moses sat listening to Jesus teach. They had come from every village in Galilee and Judea and from Jerusalem, and God had given Jesus the power to heal the sick. And some people came carrying a crippled man on a mat, and they tried to take him inside the house and put him in front of Jesus so that he could heal him from being crippled, because they had heard that he could do that. But there are so many people packed in there, standing room only, as we would say. They couldn't get him in. So they somehow managed to get up on the roof, and they tore some shingles apart, and they put some ropes on the corners of the bed, and then they let him down through the ceiling in front of Jesus. And he said to the man, get up, pick up your mat, and walk home. Verse 25 of Luke 5, at once the man stood up in front of everyone. He picked up his mat and went home, giving thanks to God. And the people said, we've seen a great miracle today, but what they also saw was true friendship and love being carried out, exemplified. Because these other 4 guys, we don't even know their names, but they had enough love for their friend that they carried him all the way from wherever they carried him to put him in front of Jesus, and they loved him enough to put him up on the roof, and they loved him enough to let him down by ropes to get him down there in front of Jesus, and he got healed. And I'm sure that the 5 of them went out and celebrated later that evening. They had a wonderful time, and he got to walk with them for the first time maybe since they'd known him. True friendship, true love. So what can you do to reflect Jesus to others? All kinds of things. You can imitate him. This is my favorite verse in the Bible, Acts chapter 10 and verse 38. Jesus went about doing good. He went about doing good. If I ever have a headstone, that's what I hope somebody would write about me, that Jim went about doing good. or Jim is an imitator of Jesus, and the same would hold true for you. Philippians chapter 2 and verse 7, referring to Jesus, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature or the attitude of a servant. I would encourage you to love people and show that you love them by some act of kindness. Jesus had this to say in John chapter 8 and verse 12, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. In describing himself in John chapter 1 and verse 5, he said, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. In Matthew chapter 4 and verse 16, Matthew says this about Jesus, the people living in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. I spent a couple of months in a city called Casablanca in Morocco, in Africa. It is Muslim ruled. It had to me the feeling of desperation and darkness because the love of Jesus is not preached or teached or shown much over there. And I was really glad to get back to the States. The impact of the light of Jesus is incredible. And he has shared it with us and asked us to show it and share it, reflect it, mirror it to others as we go through our lives. In John chapter 12 and verse 36, he says, the one who walks in darkness does not know where he is going. But while you have the light, believe in the light so that you may become sons of light, children of light. And after he had spoken these things, he went away and was hidden from them. And although Jesus had performed so many signs in their presence, they still did not believe in him. And that's a sad commentary, isn't it? That if you do good to others and show them love, if it held true for Jesus, it'll hold true for you and me. Some people won't appreciate it, and I would challenge you and say, do it anyway. Just keep on doing it, because you will be rewarded. I hope that this has helped you to be reminded of the light and the love that God has brought to this world. I hope that each one of us will reflect that light properly. Maybe you got some room for improvement. I think I do. I can always improve. I can always get worse too, but I don't want to go that direction. I want to love more and feel more and be more compassionate, be more kind, be less judgmental. Whatever, you put a ticket on it and I'll say I want to do less of that. This morning, if you have a need for prayers of the church, if you have a need to come forward and become a part of the church by repenting of your sins and being immersed in baptism, we'd invite you to do so as we stand and as we sing. There's a fountain